Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is time once again for my weekly chatty catch-up about everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the current week, as well as some general lifey chit-chat and catch-up on my week. And I had a great reading week. I read multiple things that I really enjoyed. So diving in with the first book, let's go with the audiobook that I finished because I don't have it to hold up here, so it will be somewhere here. And that is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I've read all of Chambers' novellas before, but none of the Wayfarer books that Chambers is most well known for. And this totally lives up to all of the hype. Everyone who's read it loves it pretty much. And it is really interesting because I was buddy reading it with Tiffany from Towering TBR, and she was rereading it while I was reading it for the first time. And there are just so many minor details, I think, that I didn't necessarily pick up on because I didn't know where to place my focus in reading it the first time. And so I think there's a lot of rereadability to this because there isn't really a singular narrative plot arc. You're sort of following a crew in space as they go about doing their job, more or less. They are having these certain mechanisms of space travel to go to all of these different planets and places where they have things to do, encountering new situations, encountering people they know and have relationships with, and occasionally there are moments of drama and action, but that's not really the focus of the story at all. For moments, it's the focus, but it's not a through line. And I feel like there was so much to this that is much more character-centered, and I think that's what you would hear anybody talk about with this. But it was so interesting how Chambers sort of rolled that out as far as the character focus, because you sort of start with the initial introduce the crew, and then you get the sense of who they are through relationships that they have outside of the crew. And then you get the building of their identity based on their background, their sort of culture and race, and even their body, like the fact that we have aliens rather than just all humans, makes it interesting because they have a different dynamic in their background because of how they're physically configured in some cases. And then we sort of get the sense of their internal values based on their identity. And I feel like then once we've built all of that, Chambers sort of places that under stress and strain and shows us how those values play out based on everything that these people have built of what is themselves. And that's so fascinating. So I think that progression of how we're introduced to these characters and we get a real depthy knowledge of them that is slowly growing over the course of the novel is so good. I also, maybe this is a weird take, tell me if I'm completely off base here, but I feel like this was like a pastoral novel in space. Obviously, like the pastoral refers to a specific place, so it's not literally that, but the feeling of a pastoral novel is that it doesn't really have a plot arc. You have a sense of community where everyone is sort of far-flung from one another, and they rely on each other a lot because of the distance, because there really isn't anyone but their neighbors to turn to. And I feel like that feeling of them going around to all these different planets and having connections and relationships, their own sense of community within the crew, although they're very different people, they rely on each other because they only have each other to rely on. Even when they're in conflict and abrasive to each other, they still have that sort of care internally across the crew. So I feel like so many things I love from a pastoral novel were present here. And I don't know if that's a weird take on this, but I immediately was seeing that in this story. So I think with that, like, I really enjoyed it, and I do plan to continue on, in fact, this month with the next book in the series, though I understand it's not like a direct sequel. They're all kind of standalone shared universe stories, I believe. So I'm excited to continue for sure. Next is kind of the opposite other than the vibe, in that it's very cozy. That's Kate and Frida by Kim Fay. This is the second in a loosely connected series that Fay is writing of epistolary novels. So the first is Love and Saffron. And that is a couple decades earlier than this one, so very loosely connected. But the connection is that one of these women is the daughter of one of the original characters. And so Kate and Frida are writing each other letters because Frida is in Paris, France at the start of this in the early 1990s, and this spans a couple of years. And she is writing to Kate at a bookstore in Seattle area and is asking for a book. So this has a really, really, really strong inspiration from 84 Charing Cross Road. Very strong connection to that. And they really quickly form a personal connection beyond the professional, because Frida obviously was looking for books. And they bond over books and food and just immediately have this personability between them. And so they start writing back and forth. And Kate is a writer. Frida is also a writer. And so that's one of the main elements that they sort of bond over, because Kate's working at the bookstore, but she's also trying to write her own novel. Frida is trying to become a reporter, a journalist, and eventually does wind up going to become a war reporter in Sarajevo during the war. And there's a really dramatic shift in that portion. So I wouldn't say this is pure fluff, and that's probably what I like the most about it, because these letters are capturing a sense of realism. Separate from the Sarajevo war aspect, you're getting these real moments of major things happening that someone would have included in a letter. Things like the Rodney King riots, things that were going on at the time come up just naturally because they were really affecting people's lives. But through the war element, she cannot send letters. So we have a whole section in the middle that is just her progression written in a notebook. She's writing letters still to Kate while she's there, but she just can't send them. And this notebook is in a chunk in the center of the book of her increasingly feeling the weight of what she's seeing and understanding the difficulties. Really, really weirdly, I had a moment of kismet between this book and an article that I was reading. And the article was about the last Grand Hotel in Kabul, I believe, which is a different situation. But here she talks about almost identically being put up in this hotel as a war reporter, and it's still functioning and it's still nice. And though there is like duct tape on the windows to keep them from shattering and things like that. And she thinks it's so absurd feeling to be there and be served and be eating food while everyone outside is on these rations that are expired and they're barely getting by and there's just fires everywhere. And the jarring sense of that she's experiencing, seeing the horrors of war all around her while in this place that is being contrived for normalcy as a show for her, basically. So it had a lot of really hard elements, but was so sweet and so caring. And there's just so much joy between these two women that you want to see their relationship, their friendship succeed. And you so rarely get purely platonic books. And I just love that. I love the relationship built between these two women over letters. I maybe didn't buy the very beginning when they ramp up so quickly. Like Kate is even writing on business letterhead and they immediately become sort of into personal conversation. Not anything over salacious or anything, but they do eventually like start talking about the relationships with men that they're having and the struggles with that, the struggles with their families, including the character whose mother was from the previous book. So we get some background and connection with them. And I just love the richness of these characters. This was so great. It's so full of heart. It's full of great book references and delicious, delicious food descriptions. Oh my gosh. Fay, I believe, has some food writing background, if I recall. But it just was wonderful. And I saw Kim Fay here in person at an event promoting this when it came out. And I believe there is a third book coming, in fact, which I think will be closer to recent times, even more so. So I think we're going to get another one after this, and I am so looking forward to it. Anyway, so we're already at 10 minutes, and this is going to be a very long video, I can tell. So the next one, A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle. I really enjoyed this. I can't believe I hadn't read it before. I kind of want to go back and watch the movie, though I think the movie will be a disappointment after reading this, actually, because it was just so impeccably written. It's really, really wonderful. And it's such a like middle grade fantasy that's written in such a lush, beautiful manner. And it also has such dense concepts. I was kind of shocked that L'Engle included so much here. I want to read the beginning because I had done a try a chapter for this and enjoyed the writing at the beginning so much that that's why I picked this one up this month. It was a dark and stormy night. In her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. Behind the trees, clouds scudded frantically across the sky. Every few minutes, the moon ripped through them, creating wraith-like shadows that raced along the ground. The house shook. Wrapped in her quilt, Meg shook. Like, man, the vividness of that writing pulled me in immediately, and I knew I had to read this. So I'm so pleased that I finally got to it. This is a book that Wrinkle had struggles in selling in 1960 because people said, oh, kids can't handle this. And Wrinkle said, the children can handle it fine. It's the adults who can't. And there was a great, I also did the audio with this, and there was a great clip in the audio of Wrinkle herself talking about that process of selling the book and the struggles of that. And there's also a biographical section at the back told by her granddaughter. And that was also fascinating to listen to because so much of this is caught up in the story of this family, and the parents are very scientific, and the children have been raised in sort of an unusual way. We have Meg, who is extremely smart, but seems to be non-neurotypical in some way, that she really doesn't do well in school. And so she kind of thinks of herself as dumb. And meanwhile, her brother, Charles Wallace, is also extremely smart, but he started talking really, really late. And a lot of people still think he doesn't talk. And people also look down on him for that. So both of them are really underestimated, but really intelligent people as children. And you get that feeling of being sort of an outcast. And then they also have a friend who's along with them as well, Calvin, who I didn't get as much of a read on him, but he seems to be the one who's sort of ready to take action, where Meg and Charles Wallace are much less likely to. So we're in this weird situation where their father has gone off into some sort of secret, it seems, military service and with science, and they're investigating this thing, but the mother also has been sort of researching the same things as well and is still continuing that research. But things have gone silent and they haven't had contact with their father in a really long time. And suddenly this trio of women who are really kind of strange show up in their lives and end up making a connection to their father. And that ends up in a very fantastical, and it's hard to grasp whether this is fantasy or science fiction, so I would say both probably, into this weird spacey journey where they go to kind of a very different place where there are different beings for sure, and navigate that situation there's this element of control and doubt and questioning that I found so strong, especially in this moment in the world, in the United States, that listening to the biographical elements, it really came through that this was of its time, of the 1960s, and also she was writing and thinking about these topics much earlier around World War II. And so I can see her coming out of or rejecting and pushing back on fascist ideas and high control thought. Where earlier around World War II, she was really encouraged, Lingle was, to read philosophers because she was feeling sort of a malaise of it. And people pushed her toward that, but instead she found solace in physics. And like, that's really incredible that she dove into that and just found the wonder of physics. And you see that here. And I think maybe that's part of what was so challenging, is that she is explaining physics in very accessible ways. Really, really interesting, because like, to be reading this with A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, like, that has some of the same kinds of physics concepts to it, and spacey things to it, but here it's done in such an accessible, easy to understand way that it doesn't feel like science or science fiction. It just sort of feels easy to grasp and more fantastical. So she's incorporating that very heavily here, but she's also incorporating that high control aspect. And I was thinking about the fact that she attended Sarah Lawrence, and that's covered here, but Sarah Lawrence was really massively attacked around this time by McCarthy's whole Red Scare anti-communist action. And so higher education was deeply under attack around the time she would have been trying to work on this. And that's so fascinating, because so much about this is about Meg feeling true to herself and being encouraged to question those in authority, to trust herself even sometimes over her father, that she is someone who can rely on herself and she doesn't always have to defer because other people may not have the answers and you have to seek them out for yourself. And I thought that was so powerful. And there's just so much here to the story in a really tiny package. I was so amazed by this. The layers to this are incredible. I also was shocked. So one of the reasons I've not read this is I was not allowed to as a child. But this is very heavily Christian. And it's not like heavy in the way that like Narnia is, but there are Bible quotes throughout here. There are definitely Christian allegories here and themes. So I'm really surprised, though I guess I shouldn't be, because I certainly was raised with a version of Christianity that all other versions are heretical, effectively. So I had been given the impression that this was very anti-theocratic, and it's quite the opposite, where Wrinkle is very much blending and feeling the joining of theocracy and science and the wonder of both of those things commingling. And I found that really fascinating, that she was doing that in 1960. That feels like something much, much more modern, or perhaps we've regressed. I don't know. This was fantastic, though. So yet another one. I deeply intend to continue on with this series, though this was very satisfying as a standalone entry, I think, for me anyway. So I don't feel you have to continue on with the series with this one, but I do very much want to continue reading the adventures of this family because it was so, so wonderful. And then finally, and I'm gonna try not to make this excessively long. I don't think I'm gonna talk about every single president here and like the actual story of this book, Accidental Presidents by Jared Cohen, 8 Men Who Changed America, because I think last week I excessively talked about the story of John Tyler, the first of the accidental presidents. And I end up talking way longer. So if I try to talk through this entire thing, it will take forever. And you don't need me to talk through the history. If you're interested, you can definitely look into it yourself. But this is about the vice presidents who took over for presidents who died. And interestingly, he doesn't really, like very briefly, includes Nixon, who didn't die, but resigned. So that's kind of an oddity, I think. I wish there had been more to that, though it is covered slightly. But this was so fascinating from the perspective of getting sort of a human story of these people. Because I feel that Cohen successfully really condensed these individuals' experiences and who they are very well without turning them into bullet points, which often happens in so much history teaching, I think, today, where you're running through the bullet points and it becomes mythologizing rather than humanizing who they are. And so for me, this succeeded deeply at bringing the stories of what happened to life. And you can feel the author's passion in telling these stories. He's kind of a nerd. Like he, at the back, you get his sort of acknowledgments and everything in his author's notes that literally as a child, he was obsessed with this topic. And so this is kind of a weird book because he's not a scholar or academic. In fact, I think right now he is in some position as a global head at Goldman right now. He's not a historian proper. Like I think this is the work of history that he has written. And even in that, he's done some kind of unusual things. Like he cites some popular history books by historians at points rather than primary sources or scholarly and academic sources, which I'm also fine with. I noted some things that in reviews had been critiqued as maybe incorrect, but I think for me, reading what people had critiqued versus what's actually on page, I think is maybe a misreading or reading into what he's actually saying. So I think fairly, he has well cited this, despite not being an academic or scholar, that I find this reliable. And at very least, the broad strokes are there. And that's what I was hoping for from this. And as I said, the passion shines through and really like invested me in all of these stories. And it brought it to life in a way that I can connect so much more with what's going on today, or in ways that I wouldn't have even had a scope for before. I mean, so many of these presidential stories, I realized just what a mess things have been in the past. And that was very stabilizing right now with everything going on in the US. It felt like, wow, we really have been in similar situations before. reading about Harrison and Coolidge. So Harrison and Coolidge were both like just not great as figures, and Harrison was wildly corrupt, a philanderer. He got into a relationship with a young girl who had a crush on him from the time she was 12, and it seems nothing started until after she graduated high school, but then they had a love child, and like all of this wild stuff, and lots of financial issues, was still drinking despite it being prohibition, like publicly. Yeah, he was a mess as a president. And then he died and Coolidge took over, and he's this very bland, boring guy who just kind of wanted to not do anything and get by. And he sort of did, because the economy was doing so well coming out of the war. And that he literally had a box of fake documents to carry around to make it look like he was doing things. Like they would provide him with that. And it reminds me very much of many things that are going on today. Not at the same scope or scale, I think, but there are many moments that feel very relatable, and we've cleaned up those things. Even like looking at Andrew Johnson coming after Lincoln. Lincoln was such this great progressive figure, and everything we know about things that went wrong with Reconstruction comes under Johnson. But all of that was because he was this very conflicted character. I sort of knew offhand that he was a Southern gentleman, and that was part of what made him more palatable to be the vice president, because he could pull in and sway people that were not necessarily Lincoln's audience. But he espoused a very, very progressive agenda and ideals. And yet, underneath all of that, he was sort of holding the opposing views. He was very much like a John Fetterman character of his day, where he was holding on to his slaves literally as long as he could, despite being sort of favorable to the Union and arguing against all of the Confederate power and trying to say that he would have like harsh circumstances for them and favored that. And then as soon as he got power, he did a 180, flipped on that, and was completely soft on the South. And we know didn't really clean things up fully as a result of Reconstruction under his power. And so, yeah, there have been these moments that are now very, very relatable in the past. And it seems like all of these moments of turmoil are also moments of opportunity, because in every single one, there is a big change. And that change is something where whoever is most aggressive in pursuing their agenda can get there, can make an effect on what's happening. And that was really fascinating, I think, was seeing all of those moments of change. None of these transitions happened to where they just simply were carrying out the past president's agenda. There wasn't a sort of continuous transfer of power. It always resulted in some sort of course correction in some way, even with Coolidge, where he just sort of stopped doing things. Like, it's so fascinating. So I was deeply, deeply enthralled with this. And I came out of it with just a huge, huge list of things that I want to read beyond that to get more details. I think that, as I said, kind of Cohen is just sort of an odd figure to be writing this, but I think he really, really made this something that was special because of his own personal interest in this. And so I think I now would be able to go to more scholarly and academic sources on the topics that I've gleaned that I have interest in. So for an overview, I think this was so fantastic and just really, really made me invested in reading about these sort of past figures and connecting them so much with the ways that politics plays out today and the trends and themes that have occurred over and over throughout time in US history. Really fascinating stuff. Anyway, so onward. I think the only thing that I am actively reading right now is a sort of letter poetry collection called Falling Back in Love with Being Human on audio. And I think that's all I have really in progress right now. So I watched one thing this week, and it was fantastic. It was The Quiet Girl, which is the adaptation of Claire Keegan's little novella, Foster. And I think maybe it was a little over long. It could have been slightly shorter because this is such a plotless, both book and movie. The story is just a little girl in a very large family is kind of neglected, and they're having a new baby and can't take care of all of their children. So they send her off to stay with family. And this is sort of in historical Ireland. Not like super, super far past, in the 20th century, for sure. I don't know when exactly, but they send her off to these cousins of the mother, I think, and they have no children. They have been through some loss in the past. Like that's probably the biggest thing that is present, ever present, is that they have this yearning and care that this girl has not experienced before. And they love on her. Like they really just love on her while she's there. And you watch her go from being very closed off and internal to thriving. And that's the whole story. Like it's very, very quiet, very little happens, but it's so beautiful. So I really am very happy that I finally got around to watching it. Though it was emotional and really hard to watch because you just want to see this girl continue to succeed. You want to see everything work out. So I love that one. I think that's all for everything I watched this week, that I finished anyway. I watched other stuff. My week was an okay one. It was kind of a low week, like emotionally a low week. I can't really complain though. It wasn't for any particular reason other than things are just kind of getting to me. So I was feeling very low, and one of the days I got in to walk dogs, it was like I got there and none of the dogs had been walked. It was like halfway through the shift because we have sort of different shifts for walking, so that they get multiple walks every day. And I get there and nobody's been walked. So it was just like a blow, and that really knocks you over. But then, of course, like every time I go in, you get walking the dogs, and spending time with them is so great. And they really just turn things around and made me feel better. And so when I can, I love to get in and spend time with dogs at the shelter because they just really, really make things so much improved, even when everything outside is the worst. So I'll put in a picture. I took a picture of one of the dogs, Kingston, and how could you not be cheered up at seeing that face running at you? Yeah, they really just help me. What else has gone on? I got my new tablet today. It came just before I started filming, in fact, and I started updating it. So it's doing all of its updates now, and hopefully it will be done when I'm finished filming, and then I can start the long process of getting it all set up. So that will probably be my day today, getting my new tablet set up, because yeah, I mentioned my tablet died last week, and I was debating, and I decided very quickly that lugging around my laptop was not efficient and much too onerous comparatively to just having a tablet around. Battery life is not as good for things like watching YouTube and stuff. I also renewed my passport, which is exciting. It shouldn't be as much of a consideration and worry as it is, but unfortunately it is in the US. But I got the confirmation that they had received it and the confirmation that it had been processed. So now I'm just waiting for it to get sent back to me. So hopefully everything is lined up, that I will have my passport and have formal documentation should I need it. Yeah. I think that's it. I think I've rambled too much, as always. I say that every week, though. So we're going to wind down with our recommendations for the week. I do have a few. The first one is from Brian at Bookish for a video on Black History Month, titled This Is Why, covering some Black history that he, as someone who is very invested in sort of military war history, he learned for the first time in a book he was reading. And it was just very, very fascinating history. And a good critique of the reasons why we do continue to need things like Black History Month to highlight that history. Then we have Oasis of Books. The wonderful Kim did a March Mystery Madness video highlighting a bunch of mysteries from all around the world, or covering locations all around the world, because that's one of the themes of the readathon this year. And just such a great selection. So I highly, highly recommend going and checking that out if you need a really diverse, wide range of mysteries to check out. And then finally, Gina of Gina Stanier, everybody's favorite calming, cozy booktuber, did a video that's more practical on how to remove stuck-on stickers from books. And did just sort of a short tutorial where she removed a sticker from a new book she got, or a new used book she got. So definitely check out Gina's video on removing stickers. So those are the recommendations for this week, and I think that's all. I think we succeeded in getting through this in less than an hour, which is a success here, because I had a lot to talk about book-wise this week. So many good books, and since I am hardly having anything on my plate diving into March, I'm excited. I'm going into March with pretty empty plate to fill up, but unfortunately I want to read all the things right now, and I have a huge amount set on my library borrows, so I just need to get to everything. I will definitely be diving into some history for sure. I've got a couple things that are going to be due back that I have to get to within the next couple of weeks, so that will probably be up next this week. Anyway, with that, I will say I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life, and thank you so very much for watching.